The fan in my hand had not been opened in 6 years, and I did not open it now. I held it closed against my gloved palm, like a blade I had decided not to draw, and I stepped through the doors of the Hartfield Ballroom into the one room in England I had sworn I would never enter again. The footman announced me. The Baroness Ashworth. I watched the name land. I watched it travel the length of the room, the way a stone travels the surface of a pond. And I watched the faces turn, first in idle curiosity, then in the slow, dawning recognition that the woman they had buried in gossip 6 years ago had not had the decency to stay buried. My cousin Frances found me first. She had been 17 when I left and was 23 now, and the years had not softened the particular cruelty she had inherited from her mother. "Marianne," she said, and her smile was a thing with teeth. "We had heard you were abroad. We had heard a great many things." "I'm certain you had," I said. "You always did hear a great deal and understand very little of it." Her smile faltered. Behind her, 2 of the younger Hartfield daughters tittered. At me, they thought, but the sound curdled when they saw Frances's face. I had been 21 the last time I stood in this room. I had been the eldest of 3 cousins crowded under my uncle's roof after my father's death. The one too clever to be charming and too poor to be forgiven for it. And on the night of the Hartfield ball, in the spring of 1811, I had been told, by Frances's mother, in front of a room very like this one, that no man of standing would ever take a girl with my temper and my empty purse, and that I should be grateful for the curate who had been found willing to overlook both. I had not been grateful. I had left instead, and the room had laughed. It was not laughing now. "You must tell us everything," Frances said, recovering. "Where you've been, how you've—" Her eyes moved over my gown, the silk of it, the small cold fire of the sapphires at my throat. "How you've managed." "I married," I said. "I was widowed. I inherited. In that order and rather faster than anyone expected." I let the fan tap once against my wrist. "Is that everything? You seem to want everything." I did not tell her the rest. I did not tell her that the late Baron Ashworth had been a kind, gout-ridden old man who had wanted a companion for his last 4 years and had left me, in gratitude, the use of his fortune and the protection of his name. I did not tell her that I had come back to England not to be received, but to settle a single account that had nothing to do with her at all. Because across the room, beneath the 3rd chandelier, a man had gone very still. I had felt him before I saw him. That was the humiliating truth of it, the thing I would not have admitted under torture. The room was full of noise and candlelight, and the particular heat of too many bodies in silk. And through all of it, I felt the precise weight of a gaze that I had spent 6 years teaching myself to forget. Adrian Vane, the Duke of Mereworth. He had not been a duke when I knew him. He had been the second son, the spare, a young man with no expectation of the title, and therefore no expectation of me. And that, in the end, had been the whole of the trouble. He was looking at me now across 40 feet of crowded floor, and he was not smiling, and he was not turning away. Why is he here? I thought. And underneath it, the worse question, the one I had carried across the channel without ever saying aloud. What will he do? I snapped the fan open. I turned to Frances and asked her something idle about the orchestra, and I did not look back at him. And the not looking cost me more than anything had cost me in years. I had loved Adrian Vane when I was 20, in the careless, total way one loves only before being taught better. We had met in my uncle's library, which no one used but me. He had come to borrow a book of my uncle's that my uncle had never read and would never miss, and he had found me on the window seat with my slippers off and ink on my fingers. And instead of apologizing and retreating as a gentleman should, he had sat down across from me and asked what I was reading. We had talked for 2 hours. We had talked, over the following months, in libraries and along the edges of gardens, and in the half-second margins of rooms full of other people. And he had never once spoken to me the way the world spoke to a poor, sharp-tongued girl with no dowry. He had spoken to me as though I were the most interesting person he had ever encountered. And the terrible thing, the thing I had not forgiven him for, was that I had believed him. And then his brother had died of a fever in the autumn of 1810, and Adrian Vane had become the heir to a dukedom, and everything I was had become a liability he could no longer afford. He had not told me himself. That was the part that had taught me what I needed to know. I had learned it from Francis's mother, who had taken great pleasure in explaining that the new heir to Mereworth could hardly be expected to throw himself away on a penniless cousin, and that I had been a foolish girl to imagine otherwise. I had written him one letter. I had folded it into the fan he had given me. A small, painted thing, French, the only gift I had ever accepted from him. And I had sent it by a maid I trusted. In it, I had told him that I understood, that I expected nothing, that I wished only to hear it from him directly, so that I might stop hoping. He had never answered. So I had taken the curate's insult and my uncle's contempt, and I had done the only thing left to a woman with a quick mind and nothing else. I had found an old man who needed a wife more than he needed a fortune, and I had made myself indispensable, and I had waited. Not for revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I was not clear about it myself for a long time. I had not come back for revenge. I had come back because the fan was still folded with the letter inside it, unopened, 6 years on. And I needed to know whether he had read it and discarded me, or never read it at all. I needed to know which kind of cruelty I had survived. He found me on the terrace an hour later, which I should have anticipated and had told myself I had not arranged. I heard the door and the music behind it, and then the door closing and the music going small. I did not turn. Marianne? His voice had not changed. That was unfair of it. They told me you were dead. They tell people a great many things in that room, I said to the dark garden. I found it's rarely worth the trouble of correcting them. I believed it. There was something raw under the control, and I hated that I could still hear it. For 3 years I believed it. Francis's mother said you had taken a fever abroad. I had a mass said. I turned then. It was a mistake. He was closer than I had expected, and the terrace light caught the side of his face. Older, harder. A faint scar at the edge of his jaw that had not been there before. And the rest of him stayed in the dark, so that I was speaking to half a man, and the missing half was the half I remembered. You had a mass said, I repeated. How devout. You couldn't trouble yourself to answer a letter, but you could trouble a priest. He went very still. What letter? And there it was. The thing I had crossed an ocean to find, delivered in 2 words on a cold terrace. And I understood all at once that I had been wrong about which cruelty I had survived, and that the truth was going to be worse than either. Don't, I said. My voice did something I did not permit it to do. Don't you dare stand there and pretend. Marianne. He stepped forward, fully into the light now, and his certainty had cracked straight across. I could see it. I swear to you on my brother's grave, I never received a letter. I went to your uncle's house the week after Edmund died. They told me you had refused to see me. They told me you'd called me a coward who wanted the title more than I wanted you, and that you never wished to see my face again. The garden tilted. I never said that. I know that now. He was looking at me as though I were a ledger he had been adding wrong for 6 years and had only just found the error. Looking at you, I know it now. I should have left. Every sensible part of me, the part that had built a life out of expecting betrayal, told me to walk back through that door and never let him near me again. Instead, I stood on the terrace in the cold, holding a closed fan with his unread letter inside it. And I felt the whole architecture of my anger begin to fail, and I was furious at it for failing. Someone lied to you, I said slowly, and someone intercepted what I sent. Those are not the same someone, Your Grace, and I should very much like to know who profited from both. I did not have to look far. Lord Crayle had been my uncle's friend and was now, by the look of the room, something nearer to its master. He had wanted to marry me once, not for affection, of which he was incapable, but because a clever wife with no family to interfere was a useful thing to a man who traded in other people's secrets. I had refused him with a thoroughness he had never forgiven. He came to call the next morning, at the house I had taken in Mount Street, before I had even finished my chocolate. He had grown stout and prosperous in 6 years, and he settled himself, uninvited, into the chair across from me, with the ease of a man who had never in his life been told no by anyone who could make it stick. "Baroness," he said, savouring it. "How the world turns. I confess I never expected to see you presented at Hartfield. Old families have long memories, you know. People recall things. People recall what they're told to recall," I said. "You, of all men, know how that's arranged." His smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did. "I came as a friend. Mereworth is not a man to trifle with, and a widow with a new fortune and an old reputation. Well, tongues are already busy. It would be a pity if certain stories from your girlhood found their way into print. The scandal sheets are so hungry these days." He spread his hands. "A sensible woman might prefer the protection of an established name. Mine, for instance. I am still willing to be generous." There it was, the first strike, dressed as a courtesy. "Marry me, or I ruin you in the papers." The same threat he had likely used to ruin me in Adrian's eyes 6 years ago, refined now with the gloss of respectability. I set down my cup. "Lord Crayle, 6 years ago you told the Duke of Mereworth that I had refused him and called him a coward. You told my uncle's household to turn him away, and the letter I entrusted to a maid never reached his hands. I watched him with great care. I have wondered who paid that maid. I no longer wonder." The smile finally went. "You can prove nothing." "I can prove I am no longer 21 and penniless," I said, "which you will find is a great deal more inconvenient than proof. Get out of my house." He went. But at the door he paused, and the look he gave me was the look of a man recalculating. And I knew, the way one knows whether, that the first move had failed, and a second was already being built. I should tell you that I kept my distance from Adrian after that, because it would make me sound wiser than I was. I did not. He called, properly, with a card and at a proper hour, and I received him, and we did not speak of letters or lies. We spoke of books, because it was safe. And then it was not safe, because speaking of books was how it had begun. He came again, and again. He brought me a translation he'd remembered I wanted, 6 years too late, having carried the memory of a single sentence I'd said at 20 across all the time between. The day he set it in my hands, his fingers brushed mine through my glove, and neither of us moved for the length of a held breath. And the whole forbidden weight of it, a duke and a widow with a ruined name, watched by a city that wanted us to fail, pressed down until the air in the room felt thin. "This is unwise," I told him on the fourth call, when the light was going gold in the window, and his hand was on the back of my chair, not touching me, only there. "It was always unwise," he said. "I was wise once, for 6 years. I do not recommend it." I turned to answer him and found his face very close to mine, and the answer left me. The space between us became the only thing in the room. I could see the scar at his jaw and the grey coming in at his temple, and the thing in his eyes that was not control at all. And I understood that if I tilted my head the last degree, 6 years would close like a book. The footman knocked. Tea. We came apart like two halves of something torn, and I was shaking. And I covered it by being cruel about the tea, and Adrian let me, because he had always known when to let me. But I had felt the air leave the room, and so had he. The second strike came in print, as he had promised. It was a scandal sheet, the kind that wraps poison in initials, and it ran a paragraph about a certain widowed baroness, lately returned from the continent, whose conduct as a girl was the talk of a respectable family she has now had the effrontery to rejoin. And it hinted, in the foul, careful way of such things, that there had been an understanding with a maid, an arrangement, a girl sent away. It was vague enough to be legal, and specific enough to be fatal. By afternoon, it would be in every drawing room in Mayfair. By evening, I would be uninvitable. Adrian came within the hour, the sheet crushed in his fist. "I will have him horsewhipped," he said. "I will have the printer." "You will do nothing of the kind," I said, and my voice was steadier than I felt. "Because if the Duke of Mereworth thrashes a printer over a widow, you confirm every word and ruin us both, and Crayle wins twice." I was already pulling on my gloves. "He has made one error." "Which is?" "He has put it in writing." I looked at him. Stop being furious for a moment and listen to me, because I am not the one you wronged in this, and neither is Crayle's printer. Tell me what you know and let me think." He stopped. He looked at me, really looked, the way he had on the terrace, and then he sat, this duke who could command a room with a lifted eyebrow, and he put himself at the service of my plan. "The maid," he said slowly. "If we found her, we don't need the maid." I had it now. It had been forming since Crayle sat uninvited in my morning room. "We need the man who paid the printer. Crayle is careful, but vanity makes men keep receipts. He'll have paid the sheet to run it, and a man who pays to ruin a baroness signs his own name to it somewhere, because he cannot resist the proof of his own cleverness." I folded the fan in my hand. "I know that vice. I have been studying it for 6 years. Here is what we did, and I want it understood that I did it, though Adrian's name opened doors mine could not. The cost came first, and it was real. To find the printer's paymaster, I had to go, myself, to a part of the city no baroness should enter, and I had to do it without Adrian, because a duke's carriage at that door would have announced us. I went veiled, in a hired hack, with a purse and a great deal of nerve. And I sat for an hour in a back room that smelled of ink and tallow, and bought, with money and the cold authority I had learned at an old man's bedside, the record of who had paid for my ruin. And while I sat there, alone, in the dark and the stink, I understood what it would cost if I was wrong. That I had wagered the only safety I had ever built on the chance that one cruel man's vanity ran deeper than his caution. I had no one. That was the cost, laid bare. I had built a life in which there was no one to send in my place, and I had to be the one in the dark, and Adrian was a mile away, not knowing if I lived. When I finally climbed back into the hack with the papers in my bodice, my hands would not stop shaking, and I sat alone in the rocking dark and let myself be afraid for exactly as long as the drive lasted, and not one moment more. The papers named Crayle, in his own hand, against the printer's account, instructions, and a sum, and the particular detail, include the matter of the maid, that no one but the architect of the original lie could have known to supply. He had not merely repeated an old slander, he had written in ink that he was its author. The Hartfields gave another ball a fortnight later, and all of London came, because all of London had read the scandal sheet and wanted to watch me not arrive. I arrived. I wore the sapphires and I carried the fan, and I let the footman announce me, and I walked into the silence the way one walks into cold water, all at once, because there is no kind way to do it. Frances was there, and her mother, grey now and sour. Crayle was there, expansive at the centre of his circle, and I watched him see me, and watched the flicker of disbelief that I had dared. I did not go to him. I went to the centre of the room, where the Dowager Lady Hartfield held court, and in a voice pitched to Carrie, because I had learned, at last, that a quiet woman is only ever as safe as the room permits. I said that I had been distressed by a recent paragraph in a certain publication, and that, as it touched my honour, and the honour of a gentleman present, I felt the company deserved the truth of its origin. And I read it. Crayle's own words, in Crayle's own hand, the instructions and the sum, and the maid. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The room did the rest, the way that room had always done the rest. Only this time, the stone fell on him. You sent a girl to my uncle's house 6 years ago, I said, into the silence, looking only at Crayle, whose face had gone the colour of tallow. You paid her to keep a letter from reaching the man it was meant for. You told that man lies in my name, and me lies in his, because I had refused you, and you could not bear it. And now, finding me returned and beyond your reach, you have done in print what you once did in whispers. I closed the fan. I have spent 6 years believing I was thrown away. I was not thrown away. I was stolen by a small man with a long grudge, and I am done being quiet about small men. I had not planned for what came next. I want that on the record. Adrian crossed the room. He did not hurry. He came through the parted crowd from 40 feet away. The same 40 feet, the same chandelier, and the whole of London watched the Duke of Mereworth walk to a disgraced widow's side, and stop, and turn, and face the room beside me, so that there could be no mistaking whose honour he had chosen to stand with. Lord Crayle, he said, and his voice was the quietest thing in the room, and the most terrible. You told me she was dead. You told me she despised me. I had a mass said for a woman you had simply lied me out of loving. He let that sit. I am told I cannot call you out over a scandal sheet without confirming it. So I will do something you will find rather worse. I will receive the Baroness Ashworth. I will receive her openly and often. And any house in London that wishes to keep the friendship of Mereworth will receive her too. He smiled, and it was not kind. You have spent your life trading in who is invited. Let us see how you fare, uninvited. It was done as cleanly as a blade. By the end of the week, Crayle's creditors, sensing the wind, had begun to call in what he owed. By the end of the month, he had retired to the country under the polite fiction of his health. The room that had laughed at me twice did not laugh a third time. But I am getting ahead. Because Adrian turned to me, there in the ringing quiet, in front of everyone, and the public man fell away, and only the one from the library was left. I have 6 years to answer for, he said, low, for me. Not to them, to you. Will you let me? That depends, I said, and my voice was not steady at all now. On whether you intend to do it properly this time. I find I have lost my taste for being managed. Marianne. He said my name like the first time it had ever slipped out, years ago, like a thunderclap in a quiet room. I have no wish to manage you. I have only ever wanted to be in the room when you decide things. I gave him the fan that night, in the Hartfield library, which no one was using but us. There's a letter inside, I said. I wrote it the week your brother died. It's 6 years old, and I never opened it again, because I couldn't bear to read what I'd hoped for, back when I still hoped. I pressed it into his hands. Read it now, then I'll know you've read it. That was all I ever wanted, only that you knew. He opened the fan with great care, as though it might break, and he unfolded the letter, and he read it in the candlelight, while I watched his face. I knew the words by heart. I understand. I expect nothing. I wish only to hear it from you, so that I may stop hoping. M. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, and he did not bother to hide it, this Duke in front of me. You waited 6 years, he said, to hear it from me. I waited 6 years, I said, to find out whether you were a coward or a victim. I find I can forgive a victim. The candle guttered between us. I find, in fact, that I have already forgiven him, which is extremely inconvenient, because I had built a great many plans around never doing so. He kissed me then, and it was not the kiss of a young man in a garden who has everything ahead of him and risks nothing. It was the kiss of a man who had buried me, and mourned me, and found me alive, and crossed a crowded room in front of all of England to stand in the wreckage of his own pride and choose me anyway. It was 6 years collapsing into a single point. It was the release of a pressure I had carried so long I had stopped feeling it as weight, and only knew it now, in the moment it lifted. When we came apart, I was holding the front of his coat in both fists, and the fan had fallen open on the floor between us. The little painted thing, finally empty of its secret. Properly, I said against his mouth. You said properly. Marry me, he said. It is the only proper thing I've wanted to do in 6 years. We were married in the autumn, quietly, at Mereworth, with the windows open to a garden that had been let go to seed for a decade, and was only now being brought back. I think of that garden as ours, because we planned it together. Which is to say, I planned it, and Adrian carried things, and was occasionally permitted to have opinions about roses. By the second spring, it had begun to come right. By the third, it was the kind of garden people asked to see. It is the third spring now. I am writing this at the window seat of the Mereworth Library, which is the only room in the house I will not let the servants reorganize. And Adrian is somewhere in the garden with our daughter, who is 2 and has her father's stubbornness, and, God help the world, my tongue. I can hear her laughing, The fan sits open on the sill beside me. The painted French silk of it faded now, a small ornament with no secret left to keep. Lord Crayle died last winter in the country, much reduced, mourned by no one I have met. Francis married a clergyman after all, and writes to me twice a year in a tone of strenuous affection, that I answer with exactly as much warmth as it deserves. The room that laughed at me has spent 3 years pretending it never did, and I let it, because I have found that the best revenge on a room is to stop needing its good opinion. I was 21 when they told me no man of standing would ever take a girl with my temper and my empty purse. They were right about the temper. I have kept it. A man of standing took me anyway, but I want the record to show that he did not rescue me. I walked back into that room on my own feet, with my own name, and I read the truth aloud in my own voice. And he crossed the floor to stand beside what I had already won. That is the difference. I did not need to be chosen. I had simply, at long last, decided to let myself be loved. The fan on the sill catches the morning light. Out in the garden, my daughter is calling for me, and her father is laughing. And I am going to go to them. But not yet. For one more moment, I sit and look at the small, faded thing that carried my hope across 6 years of silence. And I think, they laughed once. They are not laughing now.